Vanoggend fokus ons 'n bietjie op Suid-Afrika se aasvoëls en ek praat met Kerri Wolter, sy is die Hoof Uitvoerende Beampte en ook die Stigter van Vulpro. Kerri, welcome to GROOTplaas.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's lovely talking to you again. Let's start off with what are the latest figures when it comes to vulture fatalities, but specifically when we look at, some of these vultures losing their lives because of power lines and so.
So the figures that I'm going to give you are only what Vulpro has been dealing with. So we need to remember that it's, that the numbers that we're talking about was only probably 10%, a real small fraction of what the real magnitude is of this issue. So in the last 5 years, we've come across about 200 fatalities from power line collisions and or electrocutions. And as I said, that's just one organization that's dealing with it. There are one or two other organizations, but then we can't neglect the man on the street that maybe sees and has come across injured or grounded vultures or dead vultures from power line infrastructures.
How do these figures compare with previous years? That would be quite interesting if you can compare them.
I think the numbers are increasing, and it could be just that there's more awareness and the public, farmers, landowners are aware as to who to contact. But we are definitely seeing an increase in the number of energy infrastructure fatalities, not only fatalities, but injuries. And when we talk about injuries, basically these individuals are also lost to the wild population. So in essence, there are actually fatalities to the wild population.
Why is it specifically, what's the reasons behind why vultures are more prone or more vulnerable when it comes to collisions with power lines? And so what is that exact reason?
Yeah, so firstly, when we talk about collisions, vultures are, I like calling them as the kings and the queens of our skies. And they are up there, they're foraging, they are their necks and their heads almost like tripods where they're continuously swiveling looking for food, because that's what they do. They forage. They're not looking directly in front of them. They are flying, but they're looking down onto the landscape. And they're looking for other species, telltale signs of potential food sources. So they are not adapted to look directly ahead of them, and they're not adapted to avoid obstacles in their space. And so often these overhead lines, and it's mostly these big, thick earth lines that become invisible, they really do blend in so incredibly well into the environment that the birds just don't see them. And in fact, a really good example of that is, if you're driving along and there are power lines across the road, you will see these red and white balls that hang on the power lines. And those red and white balls are for pilots to actually see where there are power lines. Now, the reason for that is if a pilot needs to make an emergency landing and they want to use these beautiful roads, they will know that that is a danger zone with power, that the overhead lines. So we don't kind of do the same thing for vultures where we're building these, structures, and they're so high that it's going into their airspace, so to speak, and they're just not adapted to realize that if there's a structure in between there are actually power lines.
Can you tell me what's being done and how effective have mitigation measures been? Like, what are people trying to do to try and avoid this from happening?
It's very much like the red and white balls. And I like to say we need to make these lines like Christmas trees. We need to make them visible to the birds. There have been, I had an email actually yesterday saying, well, what if we paint the lines? painting the lines is not going to work because, again, it becomes about different color and the different times of day. So we need to hang things. And Eskom is very good at doing that. They know how to mitigate against collisions. And we talk about, the installation of bird flappers or spirals, and different color spirals. It could be white or black spirals, depending on the landscape, to make the lines visible. So really what needs to be done is all these big transmission lines need to become like Christmas trees. For us as human beings, we don't want that because we don't want to look on power lines. And we've become so accustomed to kind of almost looking through the power lines and looking through overhead lines that, could you imagine for us if we made things even that much more visible, how it will actually affect and impact our visibility and just being able to actually look at our environment. And yet, that is exactly what we need to do in order to protect not only vultures, it's vultures, it's crane species, it's bustards, it's multiple species of birds that are negatively impacted by bird collisions, by power line collisions.
Kerri, I absolutely agree. Can you just hold that thought? Ons gaan net gou breek vir 'n paar handelsflitse.
Fortuner GR Sport, die luksheid van vryheid losgelaat.
Waar ook al daar Afrikaans is daar kans vir saampraat, saam luister en saam staan.
Kans vir opbou, sonder ophou. Kans vir skep, vreesloos en skaamteloos.
Kans om elkeen se tree in een reuse sprong te verander.
Ek gryp die kans aan om saam met Afrikaans die toekomstige boet te gaan. Wat van jou?
Ons las lapitaal verjaar en jy is genooi. Besoek afrikaans100.org vir feesinligting.
Kom party saam.
FR Plus laat nie net rykdom groei nie, hulle beskerm dit ook met eksklusiewe beleggingsopsies wat volgens FR Plus se skatting tot 22% per jaar voor belasting of 12% na belasting kan bied, is finansiële groei binne jou bereik. Versterk jou toekoms, verseker jou nalatenskap. Besoek frplus.co.za.
Ek gesels steeds met Kerri Wolter, sy is die Hoof Uitvoerende Beampte en ook die stigter van Vulpro. Now, Kerri, we've been talking about, the dangers and also the fatalities when it comes to vultures due to, power lines and, these animals losing their lives. Just give me a quick summary. Why exactly are vultures specifically so important for us and in our ecosystem?
So vultures are, I would say, our natural cleanup crew. They really help prevent the spread of diseases through the rapid consumption of consuming carcasses. And this has been shown very prevalent with the Asian vulture crisis, where vultures were taken out of the environment and it created not only animal diseases, but also human health issues.
Yes.
And so, having vultures in our environment really helps protect our communities, our wildlife, our livestock from potential disease contamination when an animal has died. And so they are vitally, vitally important also. They're the most important and efficient scavenger basically on the planet because they're able to eat a carcass that has been riddled by diseases such as anthrax, TB, a multitude of various contagious diseases, but they are not affected by it. And the acidity in their stomach is so high that it neutralizes that bacteria, the disease, and so through that, they're able to actually prevent that disease from spreading. So they're highly, highly efficient scavengers. and they're incredibly important. Probably, I would say, one of the most important key species that we have in our ecosystem.
I also know that Vulpro played a pivotal role in the establishment of the 2022 Biodiversity Management Plan. I'd like to hear from you, what are the biggest obstacles when it comes to fully implementing the BMP?
I think probably what the rest of conservationists feel, and I would say it's probably human and financial resources in being able to implement the strategies, the projects, being able to move forward. Unfortunately, the NGOs are incredibly important in achieving the objectives of the BMP, but we are very limited by what we can do through, the availability of resources. And so I think that is a huge stumbling block in making headway with the BMP, unfortunately. We also need more government support, and we need more government backing in order to be able to implement the BMP. NGOs are not, we don't have the authority, so we work under, legislation, but we need to have the authority in the government to be able to allow us to undertake these tasks, but to support us in undertaking these tasks through, financial, through human resources, just through support in every medium in order to undertake the objectives.
If these declining numbers keep on happening and we see the trend continuing, what are some of the long-term consequences if it keeps happening? What would you say?
With some species, we do have the very real chance of some of our African vulture species going extinct. We've got 6 species listed as either endangered or critically endangered, and we simply cannot afford the continuous declines of our vulture species. And should we lose our species, the consequences will be catastrophic. And, it may not affect you and I in cities, but it's most certainly going to affect the rural communities that, their livestock are their bread and butter. And having diseases and diseases that potentially wipe out wildlife, livestock, it's going to affect already poor and battling communities and create a huge sinkhole for these communities, individuals. And then when we talk about our wildlife, South Africa and Africa is a continent rich in tourism. We cannot afford to lose our wildlife, and we cannot afford to lose our wildlife from infectious diseases. So we really do need to protect and conserve our vultures and not continuously allow these declines from happening, because the consequences will be catastrophic. And I said earlier, it won't affect you and I in cities, but it will the economy. And so our pockets will be negatively impacted by that.
Kerri, I'm also always so glad that there's people like you that also plays your role in the bigger scheme of things. Thank you for educating us, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.